And we are live. Good evening, everyone. This is Ange. This is my first broadcast of the new year. So peace and blessings to everyone. Hopefully everyone had a great ending to their 2017, and they have come into the year of 2018 feeling pretty good and rejuvenated and looking forward to a successful year. Hopefully everybody has had a wonderful first few weeks of the year, and looking forward to doing some wonderful things in this new year as it relates to just normal successes. Hold on, I'm typing at the same time. Normal successes and being able to shed light on an issue that some of us knew very little about, perhaps a few months ago or a year or more years ago. And we're learning more information about, and that would be destructive cult organizations, mainly Bible-based destructive cult organizations. So I'm going to take some time this year to interview some former members of destructive cult organizations. And I am going to start today with my very, very first guest in terms of interviewing. And her name is Cassie Carlotto. Am I saying your last name right?
You are. That's perfect.
Awesome. Well, say hello to the audience out there.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you on the interwebs.
Well, we're going to have some time to unpack who you are, what you do, your background, and what your story is, and how you can help others, and how you have basically helped yourself and family and got from where you were to where you are now. So we'll dive right in, unless there's something else you want to say before we begin.
That's perfect. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Great. Well, I'll start by telling you to introduce yourself to the viewers and let them know how you came to be in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So as any stories like this, it's kind of a long and winding story, but I'll try and make it as concise as possible, but allow you guys to follow along in my evolution and how I came to be where I am now. I started going to a church when I was 8 years old. I came to go to this church through a bus ministry. So for those that aren't familiar with that, it's a church will have different buses, like literal yellow buses, or, they'll paint it a different color, and they'll go into different neighborhoods around the community, and they'll pick up kids and take them to church. So it seems pretty innocent. It's a wonderful ministry, depending on the church, of course, and that's how I started going. So I had always been a spiritual type kid, like not like anything too crazy or overboard, but I said my prayers and stuff like that. And I always felt like I had, a spiritual side to me. Probably some of that was going to Catholic church with my grandma when I was younger, but this happened to be a Baptist church. So I started going. I had some troubling things happening in my home life as a young child. My dad was an alcoholic, and church seemed a great escape. Pardon me. I started going. I liked the people. They were really nice. It seemed very innocent, and I dove right in. So I got to go to church on the weekends, and then it wasn't long before I started volunteering and helping out. And of course, any church organization loves to have volunteers. So I tried to spend as much time there as I could. So it started just going once a week, and then I ended up going Saturday morning service, Sunday school, Sunday night service. I was helping out on Saturdays. I was going to the midweek services pretty much anytime the doors were open and I was able to get a ride because my parents didn't go to church. I was there. So that's how I got into this church, and it's a Baptist church, and I don't think all Baptist church are bad, of course, and I definitely don't think all of Christianity is bad. This church happened to be an independent fundamental Baptist church. And they're known to be a little more hardcore evangelical, a little bit more stronger opinions than maybe some of the other Baptist churches that you might find in other places in the country like the South. And I should note that this was in Southern California. So it was actually kind of odd to have that kind of church where it was. But alas, that's how I started going there. So
Wow.
yeah, so it was pretty innocent. I started going. I liked it. I liked the people. I liked connecting with God. And it was that escape for me. So I think that's what originally pushed me towards diving right in. So I didn't realize for many, many years that it was a cult, probably not until my mid-20s. And I started going when I was 8, and probably by the time I was 10, 12, I was really involved in the church. There were a lot of red flags along the way, though, which is something that when I talk to people now, I say, don't ignore the red flags, because if there's something that goes off inside of you that doesn't make sense, or just the answer you get is, a trite answer that is, meant to silence you, just take note of those things and make sure that you use your own mind and just don't ignore them, because, again, there were a lot of red flags. So some of the things that, looking back now, it's a lot easier to see it, of course, but at the time, it was just like, oh, that's weird. Oh, that doesn't make sense, but okay, can't question. So some of those things were, this church had a very us against the world mentality. It was the saved people against the not saved people. And they even touted some statistics, which of course, there's no way to verify any of this, that 99% of the entire world and all the population that's ever lived is going to burn in hell forever.
Right.
So it's like, wait, what? Like 99%? It's like, okay, well, then why would God create these people that are going to burn in hell? Oh, God's ways aren't our ways. That was the answer to a lot of the questions that were asked. And that was when you were brave enough to ask questions. So another one of the red flags was asking any sort of question was highly frowned upon. And so you learned very quickly that you just didn't ask questions. If there were things that didn't make sense, you kept them to yourself. And if you did start asking questions, you were seen as somebody that, well, your faith in God must not be strong enough, or you're doubting, or you're, a black sheep in the church and you're just trying to cause dissent, which of course that's, growth is learning and asking questions. So that wasn't really encouraged.
Now, question for you. Was it ever spoken that you shouldn't ask questions, or was it just you noticed how other people were being treated when they asked questions, and so you didn't want to ask questions?
It was a little bit of both. So one story that stands out very vividly in my mind, and I was a young teenager at this point, I was probably 13, and a really good friend of mine, he was a year older than me, he was a boy, he was around 14. He's a very inquisitive person, and he's full of questions and full of life and full of vitality, and he just is constantly, like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? And people, like, I saw the way people looked at him, and they're like, ugh, he just asked too many questions. And they would say stuff like that. So I don't think they ever outright came out and said, no, you can't ask questions. In fact, they might have even said, oh yeah, sure, you can ask questions. But when it really came down to it, you were looked down upon if that was the kind of person that you were.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's noticeable to the outsiders who are not asking the question, but it's very noticeable to the person who is asking the question as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Or you get a lot of silencing answers like, well, just trust God and, it'll work itself out and stuff like that. And it's like, well, that's not really answering my question. So, but if that's the answer you're given, you're like, okay, well, I guess I don't ask that question again, because if that's the answer I'm going to be given. So it was really weird. And I think the first time or two it happened, you're like, okay, that's weird. But then you keep pushing those down, and then it becomes your normal, and you stop thinking of it as weird. So there were definitely a lot of those. There were highly discouraged from getting an education outside the church. So they had a private school that was, of course, unaccredited. You don't go to college, you don't associate with the world. If your family, like my family, didn't go to church, I was highly encouraged to not associate with them because they were not quote unquote born again Christians, and they could, turn me, evil.
Now, how do you not associate them with them when you joined at age 8, right? So how do you not associate as a child with your family?
So when I became like 10, 12, preteen, and that's when I got really involved in the church. So if you weren't volunteering on the weekends and in the different ministries when you were able to, you were definitely looked down upon. Like, well, why are you hanging out with your family if you could be here? And your family is not Christian. So it was definitely a lot of that. And it kind of, in a twisted way, it made sense. It's like, okay, we're Christians, we're called to separate ourselves from the world. My family is of the world. They're not saved. And they're not, or at least not in the way that we were taught you were saved. And so, yeah, I shouldn't hang out with them. Yeah, I should hang out more with the people at church. So in sick and twisted ways, we just rationalized all the red flags.
Yeah. And someone in the chat section asked again, what cult were you a former member of? So I let them know in the chat that it was the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church's cult.
Yeah. And I hear of people with experiences like they go through like super violent cults and maybe something very extreme like where they're secluded in the desert and having compounds, something you would, hear a Lifetime story about or something. I think why this is so dangerous is because on the outside, it looks very innocent. It looks like a very normal church, but you don't realize it until you get on the inside, how many of the cult-like tendencies that there were. So before I get there, I should say, so I went through this church through my teens, very, very active and very involved. At one point, I surrendered to God that I wanted to be in full-time ministry. So that was kind of what you did. A lot of people did that. Either they wanted to be missionaries or a pastor, or usually the women that surrendered to ministry their calling was to be a pastor's wife. And that was my particular calling, which it kind of makes me chuckle now, but it was very serious at the time. And that was, as a girl, that was my future laid out for me, was that I would be a helpmeet to some man. And that was how I was going to be pleasing in the eyes of God. I definitely don't think now that if you stay home and raise babies and you have a family, that's bad. Obviously that's silly. Everybody chooses their own path. But in this particular church, women that worked were very few and far between. And it was more of that they look down upon you and you should trust God, and your place is to be home and taking care of your family. So I got married. I ended up getting married. I met my future husband at the church there. And he wasn't raised in an independent fundamental Baptist. He was actually from the South. And again, we were in California at the time. He was in the military. So he didn't know. He's like, oh, it's a Baptist church. I went to a Baptist church at home. So he very innocently joined this church as well. And he's a good guy. And we actually later ended up getting divorced. But anyway, so I was 16 when we got married. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, it was so young. And
how did your family feel about that?
So actually, and this is kind of ironic and funny enough, but I am probably one of the most analytical persons in my family. Always did really good in school, really smart. From a very young age, I was, speaking complete sentences, and I just was very mature for my age. So my mom is kind of a person that is, oh, you follow your heart, and if that's what's right for you, then, okay. So I think with me being so mature at that age, even though I was seemingly making irrational choices, she's like, well, Cassie has a head on her shoulders. She'll be fine. So my mom didn't argue with it. Now, my thought process behind why I got married, just as myself, and I remember myself processing this. So I was 16. My husband was 21 at the time when we got married.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we were thinking, I was like, okay, do I wait until I graduate high school? Because I hadn't graduated high school. I was like, do I wait till I graduate high school, which is probably, about 2 years away? Do we wait a few years after that? So I was in my mind weighing all these options of when is the appropriate time. Do I wait 2 years? Do I wait 4 years? What have you? And what I finally concluded with was, if I know the person that I want to marry, and I, felt very strongly that I did at that point, and we're gonna end up getting married anyways, it doesn't make sense for me to wait, because this is my future laid out in front of me. So my future is I'm gonna get married and I'm gonna have kids and I'm gonna raise kids. So what does it matter what age I'm at? So,
These were your thoughts at age 16?
At age 16. Yes, I remember it very specifically. So in a twisted way, it made sense at that time. Of course, now looking back, I'm like, oh my God, I have a daughter and she's 11. I was like, oh, F no, she's not getting married when she's 16. She better be at least in her 30s, because looking back, I just see how much you change and you're a child, and you're not fully evolved in so many different areas in your life. And so I can give you 100 reasons why it was a bad idea now, but at the time it made sense to me. And it was my choice to make. I wasn't forced into it. And actually, a lot of people in the church didn't know we were even courting. It wasn't dating, it was courting. So,
okay.
So we got married. My husband he wanted to be a pastor, and he studied his Bible avidly, which is one very nice thing about him, is that a lot of pastors are a lot of fluff, if you will. Like maybe they'll come up with a couple cutesy little scriptures and then, talk about stuff for an hour and then you leave and feel good kind of message. And that wasn't who he was. So he was very, very interested in the Bible and studying it. And so the crazy thing is that over the years, and we had more cult-like experiences. We ended up leaving one church that was just horrific, and it's still kind of, I've processed it and I've moved on, but at the same time, I look back and I'm like, wow, did I really go through that? But anyway, wow. Yeah. But the way we ended up getting out of this cult was actually my husband from studying the Bible. So we'd been taught so many rules over the years, and especially in something like this kind of church atmosphere that relies heavily on legalism. And if you don't do this, then you're not right with God and you need to do X, Y, Z. We started finding out that the Bible doesn't support so many of those. So we're like, wait, no, we're taught this, but no, the Bible says this. And we started studying and questioning even some of the foundational Christian beliefs, like what we were taught about baptism didn't line up. What we were taught even about heaven and hell didn't seem to line up. And so we just got to a point where like, oh my God, like we can't stay here. We can't stay in this ministry any longer, at least while remaining true to ourselves. So we actually together ended up leaving the church. And then we kind of went through what a lot of people go through when they first leave church is, okay, so I'm going to go find another church, maybe something that's more aligned, maybe. So you do find like there's some of these little offshoot, like little churches in corners that are a little quirkier and a little bit open to different things. And so we did find a few of those. We did the home church thing. That slowly dwindled down. And then we're like, well, we'll just do a family church kind of thing. Because at this point, we had 3 children.
Okay.
But finally we just stopped because it seemed like we were forcing it. And it was kind of, not that our heart wasn't into it. It just didn't make sense for us anymore.
Okay. Now I have a question. You said that the cult that you were involved in was heavily reliant upon legalism. Can you explain that for the audience? What does that mean?
Yeah, so when I think of legalism, I think of an organization, or at least in the church atmosphere, an organization that says you need to do this or this will happen, whether or not that's actually supported by the Bible. So I'll give you a few examples. So, so tithing, you can kind of toe the line with that one because tithing is in the Bible, regardless if it's in the Old Testament, what have you. So there's a lot of different debate there. But some of the rules that we had were you couldn't have cable TV or you were not right with God. If you were a woman, you could not wear, you could only wear skirts or dresses, and they had to be past your knees. Of course.
Wow.
Yeah, so gosh, let's see what else. There's so many of them that my mind is going blank, of course. But and just, you can't go to college, and it's just.
And what was the rationale about the college?
So if you go to public college, then you are you're in contact with worldly people, and it could make you lose your faith because you could start questioning your beliefs. Yes.
It could make you lose your faith because what?
Oh, so worldly people. So if you go to a college and there's a professor and you have to learn about science and you have to learn about how the world was formed, and that goes against what the Bible teaches, then that could be in danger of making you lose your faith. Let alone just interacting with people, quote unquote, out in the world. So a lot of
and then the skirts and dresses ordeal, what was that based on according to the church?
So there's some scripture, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I think it was in the Old Testament. It's about women covering their thigh, and there's also one about robes. So between those couple verses, it got twisted into you had to cover your thigh and you had to have a robe-like garment.
Wow.
It was a skirt or dress that was not form-fitting and did not cause men to lust after you. So there was definitely that factor as well, is our job was to cover ourselves enough that we would not cause men to stumble by lusting after us.
And what about, so they couldn't wear pants? Pants would call the women.
Men could wear pants, but women couldn't.
No, I mean women. Yeah, because that would cause them to lust after them.
Yes, but men could wear pants, and the reasoning on it being wicked for a girl but not for a man was that, well, men are wired differently than women, so men are visual creatures. So a man would look at a girl in pants and lust, but a girl wouldn't look at a guy in pants and lust. So weird, I know.
So your church at least did acknowledge that the pants garment was not in existence, that it was a new phenomenon, and that the men could wear it.
They wouldn't admit it. They would say that the Bible supports it and these are the verses, even though it doesn't say that. I mean, so there are other things too, like, you could wear makeup, but it needed to be natural looking. Like, and if you wore red lipstick, it was like, oh, she, like, you be like hushed whispers of, oh, she looks like a harlot or something. So there were so many rules and so many things you had to keep up with that it was.
Now, how did you and your husband operate within the parameters of the legalism and the rules and everything? Was your husband saying to you, oh, don't wear red lipstick, which I imagine you probably weren't anyway, but, oh, make sure your skirt is long enough. Was he trying to enforce that as well, or were you just doing it on your own?
For the most part, I was doing it on my own. So thankfully, my husband at the time, he he wasn't mean or he wasn't harsh like a lot of the men at the church were. And I know now many years after the fact of abuse and all sorts of things, like even like between husbands and wives and husband and the children and just lots of different stuff. So thankfully I never experienced that. How those kind of things played out in our relationship was he definitely liked me to be more modest. I remember one time that I found a dress that I really, really I loved. I was just obsessed with it. And I think I got it from like Ross or one of those like little shops, nothing super spectacular or fancy, but I came home and I tried it on and he said, "You're not really going to keep that, are you?" And I was like, "Wait, what?" I was like, "What what? What are you talking about?" And he said that it was too tight across my breasts.
Oh, wow.
And that he would not be seen in me in public wearing that. And I was just crushed. I was like, what? Because I mean, even though those rules were kind of an undertone of our entire lives, it was the first time that he had stopped me and said, "No, you cannot wear that." And I mean, if I looked at that dress today, I'd probably laugh because I'm sure it went to my knees and it covered my breasts. I think it went up even to my collarbone. It just happened to be a little bit tighter across the top. So he wasn't mean, but we did have those rules. And he did have the final say in our family, which I think I didn't realize it at the time, but I kind of resented him for it. And again, he wasn't mean or anything. It was just kind of how we were raised and taught. But it was stuff like that. And he didn't like red lipstick either. And he didn't like me to wear heels and be taller than him. So it was just a bunch of little things that, looking back, seems so silly, but were very much a part of our lives at the time.
Wow. Wow. And how old again was your husband when he got into that church?
So I think he had started coming to that church the year before we got together. So he was around 20. So again, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia right now, and this is the area that he's from. We actually ended up settling here. And so he didn't know it was a cult. So I don't think all Baptist churches are cults. It just happened that this one happened to be, and he unwittingly joined this church because he's like, "Oh, I went to a Baptist church at home, so I'm going to go to a Baptist church here." And this is the one he happened to find. So, so he was raised as Baptist, but not this kind of Baptist. Like his mom doesn't wear skirts every day or dresses and doesn't adhere to a lot of those kind of rules. So.
Right. And so you mentioned that you didn't know the whole time that it was a cult. At what point do you believe, looking back now, that you realized this is a cult? Well, cult in particular, but even, okay, something is really off about this, and I actually have to pay attention to what feels off.
Honestly, I don't think it's come until a few years ago. So maybe 3 to 5 years ago. So we ended up leaving the church altogether. And that was more, we didn't think of it as we're leaving a cult. It was more, we're leaving this church because it doesn't line up with the Bible. I don't think cult ever really came into our minds.
And what year was that?
So I think it was the year around 2007, maybe.
Okay.
2007.
Okay.
So about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And then we ended up getting a divorce in 2010. And I don't think it was directly related to this. It was, but once your life unravels from what it was built on, which was Christianity, we worked through a lot of different things, and then we ended up getting divorced. So I think it was a factor, but it wasn't the main reason why we got a divorce. And then it wasn't until after that, and I went on my own spiritual journey, that I was like, wait, I was in a cult, and it really didn't even dawn on me for so long. And when it did, it just kind of, so many things clicked into place for me. I was like, oh my God, well, that's why this, and that's why that, and well, no wonder this. And I, so this is to take a little rabbit trail, but there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of sexism, there's a lot of disdain for immigrants, and just so many things that in my mind, I would unconsciously think something that was really hateful and mean, and I knew, like, as soon as it came to my mind and I would think about it, I would say, this is not true, this is not right. And I'm like, where is this coming from? And I traced it all back to the church that I was involved in and the way they treated people. And it's just amazing to me that a lot of the, subconscious things that we learn about society and about race and all that stuff, that a lot of the bad things that I've spent years undoing was learned in church. So it sounds crazy, but it's true.
Now, those bad thoughts that you were having, you're saying these are thoughts that you had after you had already been out of the cult?
Yes, absolutely. So to give you a few examples of things, to a church in the northern part of the United States for a little while, and they made fun of Black people. And at the time I was like, wait, what? Like, I don't understand. So I grew up, like, my next door neighbor was Black. He was my best friend. My other childhood friend across the street was a really good friend. He was an Asian boy. And it was just coming from a big city like San Diego, where I didn't really see racism. I didn't really see, like, what it was like to be an immigrant, like all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then going off into, like, these small churches and small towns where, they say side comments about different groups of people. It floored me at the time, but I was like, no, I pushed it down. No, I pushed it down. And then coming out of it, and years later, I was having those same, ugly thoughts. And I was like, where are these coming from? And I really didn't know, because I didn't remember until I started unpacking it myself and was like, oh my God, this is where it's coming from. So I had to retrain my brain, and was like, about how I felt about so many different things, not just about, like, race and immigrants and all that kind of stuff, but like, I had to research things like abortion. And, I was a, devout, if you will, Republican. And so I was like, well, am I really a Republican, or am I a Republican because you couldn't be anything else at this church, and all Democrats were bad? Well, what did all Democrats were bad mean? Why did we think that way? So I just had so much I had to relearn for myself, because I had, spent so many years in this church, that so much was, I won't say crammed into us. It was just a part of our life. And then you don't stop to question it until you're on the outside of it.
Now, what was your relationship like with your family as you were going through this from age 8 until you got out, and then thereafter up until now? Like, were you distancing yourself from them?
Yeah.
I know that the church told you to. And then how was your family responding? How were your parents responding? Any siblings? How were they responding? How did that actually play out?
Yeah, so I was definitely distancing myself. Like, my family is not saved. They're not living the Christian lifestyle, so they're not the kind of people that I want to hang out with. And so as a child, I don't think it really, nothing really came up about it. And the reason why is because we have a large family. There's 5 kids in our family. And again, my mom is kind of the type of person that, hey, do what you like to do what you want, kind of thing, and then left you to your own devices. Like, she wasn't, like, super hands-on, like maybe some other families would be. And so church, oh, Cassie's a little weird. She only wears skirts and dresses, and, she's a 13-year-old girl. Or she would wear tennis shoes with dresses, stuff like that. So I think it was more of they kind of just thought it was a cute little phase I was going through. But then as I got a little bit older and I got married, as I said, at 16, and we moved away when I was 18. So I think I was just so ready to get away from my family, and being in the church definitely encouraged, like, okay, I was like, oh, finally, I don't have to worry about that. I'm away from my family, and I distanced myself. So for many years, I distanced myself, and only within, well, since we left the church, have I been able to more engage with my family in a loving, like, wholesome kind of way. Whereas before it was like, no, I want to stay away from these people because these people are not Christians, and I only want to interact with them when I have to. Now it's like, okay, these are my family. So it's like a real true family, and not just these people that I am, forced to share genes with.
Now, how were you able to interact with other Christians who were not a part of the independent fundamental Baptist church that you were a part of? Were they still saved? Were they legitimate, or could you not interact with them either?
They were considered part of the world. There were jokes about how they were wishy-washy Christians. They made jokes about, oh yeah, in the South, they're all high and mighty, but then they're on their porch smoking cigarettes. And so they made fun of those people, and they made it seem like they were less than, and they most definitely did not think most of them were saved. They would count those people as the world and included in the vast majority of people that would go to hell forever.
Now, were there any people who were saved for church doctrine, the cult doctrine, that was not a part of your church?
I think if you cornered somebody and said, is there anybody outside of independent fundamental Baptists that is saved and going to heaven? Like, they would be hard pressed to not say, oh yeah. They would probably say, oh yeah, there are. But if you ask them to give the exact steps, it's very independent fundamental Baptist like. So it's step by step through the Romans road. You can't just believe in God. You have to believe in God and accept his gift of eternal life. And people that have spiritual experiences that do not follow this ABC path were probably being led by the devil and not God, even if it's a positive experience. So they would say that, oh, sure. But then when it really got down to it, they thought that only people like them were the ones that are going to heaven to be with God.
And so here's a question in the chat section, or really a comment that can be turned into a question. And Carmel says, if you stay away from non-Christians, how are you supposed to evangelize? So how exactly were you all supposed to bring people to Christ if you really couldn't be with those worldly people?
So you could evangelize with them, and they had several weekly, I think they called it soul winning. So they would gather together a group of 10, 20 people, and they would go knocking on doors and trying to convert people. So one of the verses they used in the New Testament was the one that we are to be in the world, but not of the world. So you can be in the world, you can't break bread with people that aren't Christians. You can't hang out with them. You can't be friends with them. If your neighbors are not Christian and you happen to be, their form of Christian, then you needed to be really careful and not let your kids play together, because their kids could influence your kids. And so they didn't associate or have any friend relationships with anybody that were not like them.
Wow. So is that pretty much sums up how you were? You did not have anyone who you would consider a friend who was not a part of the cult that you were in?
Oh, not a single one.
Had you had anything that might even look like a friendship or could have formed into a friendship with anyone outside of the cult that you were in?
So I had a grade school friend that had moved away, and I think we were around 10 years. And I kept in contact with her, and she was not a Christian the way that I was the Christian. Like her family, I believe, they weren't practicing, but I think they're had roots in Catholicism, which was most definitely wicked. Like of the highest form. And again, and they just made fun of them all the time. So anyways, we won't go into that. But so I made contact with my friend, and I probably saw her and went and visited with her at least once or twice a year for so many years. So she was one friendship but there was nobody like that was near me that I would hang out with regularly, like go to coffee or go to breakfast or anything like that. There wasn't anybody like that I can think of right now, but she's the only person I could think of, and I would just see her once or twice a year for a weekend.
Were there any warning signs? Were there any group of people or any individual people who were trying to say, hey, Cassie, I think that this church that you're involved in is not harming you? Did anybody tell you that?
You know, I can't remember a single person saying that. So I think I mentioned it briefly previously, but I think the dangerous thing about these kind of cults are they seem kind of normal on the outside. So it's hard to really notice until you get in it. So looking in, you look at somebody that's going to a Baptist church and it's like, okay, well, she wears skirts all the time. That's kind of weird. She ties, okay, whatever floats your boat kind of thing. But there was nothing violent. There was nothing, I didn't move out into a compound in the middle of nowhere. So I just don't think any alarm bells really went off for anybody because it seemed innocent looking in.
Now, why didn't or I don't want to say it didn't, but what about your parents? What about your immediate family? Were they not? I mean, your time control was definitely being utilized by this cult. Why didn't your family say anything?
I think, again, they just thought it was Cassie's thing, and, it's a church, so it can't be bad, right? It's, you go to church and that's associated with being a good person. So I don't even know if it would have crossed their mind that it could be bad unless I started exhibiting dangerous behaviors, which I never did.
Why didn't your family go to church, whether that one or another one? Why didn't anybody else go?
My siblings came off and on occasionally, but they didn't really like it. My parents have never been church-going people, so they weren't interested in going, but they didn't feel like they needed to stop me from going.
Ah, okay. I see that we have others inside with us. I see Brother TVCO and a Warrior of God. Peace and blessings. Okay, well, maybe they're on mute. Okay, well, go ahead. So it just wasn't something that they necessarily wanted to do.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and even when they visited you, did they have any comments in particular, or just, okay, this is okay?
No comments.
Wow. So why today do you think you were in a cult?
It's a great question. And I actually so within the last couple of years, when I slowly started talking about my experience, so I didn't talk about it. So even after we had left the church, I got divorced and I went on my own spiritual path because I still felt God calling out and reaching out to me. And I didn't understand because I was taught that if you're not in church, you are backslidden, that God is mad at you. And so I kept having these pings from God, if you will, like just this knowing in my spirit that God's trying to reach out to me. But I couldn't connect. And so that went on for a while. And so I was like, okay, God, I feel like you're still there, but I'm not connecting. So what do I need to do? So I did what I thought I should do, and that's go to church. So I started going to church. I went to a Catholic church. I went to another Baptist church. I went to a community church. And everywhere I went, I wasn't connecting. Like nothing ever felt right. And I didn't understand. I was like, okay, God, you want to reach out to me. You want to have a relationship with me. But everything I try, I feel like it's not the right thing. So this went on for many years. Now, it wasn't like every week I went to a new church. It was like, okay, a few months would go by. All right, I still feel like there's something there. Okay, maybe I'll go try this church. And then a couple of the churches that I did go to that were okay, maybe I didn't feel like I connected right away, but I was like, well, I'll try it and I'll go a few times. And one, I even volunteered in some ministries because I liked this church a little bit more than the others. And so it was just this cycle of trying to connect with God and not being able to for several years on end. So finally, I had a moment where God just spoke very clearly for the first time in years to me. And I think I don't think I was at desperation, but I was like, okay, God, like, what the hell? Like, pun intended, what the hell? Um,
Right.
I am trying and I can't reach out to you and I don't know what's going on. And I keep going to these churches, and, church is where you meet God. And so he revealed to me that I needed to take him out of the box of church. Like I needed to take him out of the box of Christianity and just see where that led me, and just to release this whole, you have to be in church to be right with God. So that's when my, post Christianity relationship with God just took off like a rocket ship. Like I learned so many things in such a short amount of time, and I didn't go back to a church that I didn't want to or anything like that, but I learned all sorts of things and ways to connect with God that I had never either hadn't heard of before, or I was like, whoa, that's wicked, or oh, that's new age, or so things like meditation and mindfulness, and even yoga is another way you can connect with God. And these are all things that, they made fun of, and oh, that's new age, and oh, that's so ridiculous and silly, and all this kind of stuff. So I dove head first into this whole new world of things that I had never tried or experienced. And I found that instead of feeling like a horrible person that God was mad at me, my heart and my mind just exploded and expanded and just made so much more room for not only God, but for love in my life, and for friends, and for family, and for people that I used to go to church with. And I just learned so much in a very short amount of time.
Wow.
And I say all that to go back to, what was your question? I don't know if that answered it, because I forgot what you.
I think it did. I think it answered the question. Brother TVCO or Sister Rika, not sure which one of you are on, and Warrior of God, do you all have any questions of Cassie?
Hey, how you doing? Hey,
Hi.
Sister Ange.
Hey there.
Okay, so who am I speaking to?
My name is Cassie.
Okay, Cassie, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I am TVCO, the voice crying out. That's the name I go by.
Okay.
Yeah, well, nice to meet you. I would like to say one thing, and when we're dealing with God, it begins with the Bible. It begins with Genesis. And then we go from Genesis on down to Revelation. When it comes to knowing who God is, we have to follow, his instructions. And I'm not necessarily saying when you get to Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, because that was God's relationship with, the children of Israel. But then when we get into the New Testament, it branches off to all the nations to bring them back to him. And so whenever we join a church and, we're looking for answers, you know, sometimes we may run into difficulties to where that church has their own view of God. And we may leave the church and we may travel God outside of the church. And both in essence could be wrong, if we're just dependent on the authority of a church. Now, there is a church that is the Church of Jesus Christ that's built on the rock, but it's kind of hard to navigate. So that's where you got to go to God and go back to the Bible. He says, how do you reach him? How do you communicate with him? If you don't, then you may, like you just mentioned, you may find different things that that's how you connect to God. But if we're talking about the God of the Bible, you have to make sure that what you're a part of, whether inside of a church, the church, you got to make sure that when you read the Bible, that's actually there. That's his instruction for you or me or anyone else. So I just wanted to say that.
You want to respond to that, Cassie?
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts. That was lovely. So, one of the things I was pleasantly surprised with after my deconstruction, if you will, was that the God that I had in my heart growing up was not the God I met after my deconstruction. So, I was very pleasantly to find out that God was alive and well and wasn't a figment of my imagination, and God is the God of all of us and not just, you know, these very select handful of people. So that is one of the things I did learn that I was very excited about, because, you know, when you go to a church that's so exclusive and, you know, only these small handful of people, and then you come on the outside and you're like, no, that's not how God is. God's the God of all of us. So, that was definitely my experience, was finding God was a lot more loving and kind than I had ever imagined that he would be. And I'll just add that one of the verses that kept coming to me while I was in my wilderness, if you will, was I think it's in Jeremiah. I could be wrong though, but it's the verse that says, you will find me when you seek and search for me with all your heart. So I felt like I was searching with all my heart and I wasn't connecting, but I didn't give up hope, because I was like, no, God, you say that if I search for you, I'm going to find you. So I knew that I would. I knew it might not be the way that I thought it would, you know, the way that I was raised, but I knew that it would be authentic and real. So that gave me hope. So that's what I tell people now, like when they're searching and they're not connecting, to just keep trying, because God's out there and he's going to allow you to connect whenever the time is right, I guess. I don't, it's
So
different.
that is correct. It's Jeremiah 29:13 is the scripture that you were quoting.
Yeah, that many times I was like, God, I'm searching. I'm here. I don't see you or hear you, but I know you're there. And I know if I keep searching that I'll find you. And for me, I did. And it was wonderful.
Another question here from the chat section. This was a while ago, but I'll state it now. It was Carmel, and she said, what is the difference between a cult and religion?
I think of religion as an organized way or a methodology to find or to seek and to search and find God. So if you think of, you know, Christianity, or if you think of Buddhism, or if you think of Mormonism, or they take this book and this is their methodology for reaching and connecting with God. Now, a cult is something different. In my mind, a cult is a specific group of people that have behaviors that tend to be more along the lines of being isolationists, or separating themselves so much from other people that it stands out in some way or another. And they may have tendencies that could be harmful. So thinking about like being brainwashed, or even like some cults have some violent tendencies. It's one thing to believe in God and follow God. It's another to believe in, we'll just say, a God that encourages you to strap on a vest and go and blow up a bunch of people. So I think of it more as a cult of something that's dangerous. So either dangerous to other people or dangerous to your psyche, or in a situation where you can't leave for some reason because of something that they're teaching you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you for answering that. Who is that? Get ready, Matthew. You there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everybody.
Oh,
This is Rika.
that's you, Rika?
Yes, it's me, Rika. I didn't know you was talking to me. I thought you were talking to Matthew. That's why I was waiting.
No, I just saw the name. I didn't know who it was with the thing. Hey, how you doing, sis?
Girl, that's my other account. I'm sorry. It is
Do
Matthew.
you have
I'm doing
any
fine.
questions for Cassie at all?
It's nice to hear the young lady testimony. I'm glad that she got out of that cold tit. But I'm just enjoying myself, feeding my kids, and just sitting back and listening to the wonderful news that she had walked out of it and her relationship with Christ. She got her relationship back with Christ. So I'm just listening and enjoying myself. And it's nice to meet you. And God bless you. Keep you in prayers.
So fast forward just a bit. Tell me what ultimately happened to your now ex-husband, and then tell me what you're doing now that you know that you were involved in a destructive cult organization, and how are you moving forward and utilizing the experiences that you had from that experience today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my ex-husband, so at the time that we stopped going to at least the independent fundamental Baptist churches, he was studying to become a pastor. He was in we'll call it a private Bible college, and he was studying full-time to enter the ministry. I think I mentioned that previously. So when we left the church, we were both in our 20s. Neither of us had education. He had a couple really low paying jobs, and he couldn't figure out, not that he couldn't figure out, it's just that we were really poor for a long time. And, when you don't have any skills and you don't have any education, it's hard to move up. And so he started going back to school. So he went to a couple different colleges, and so he ended up going all the way through and getting his master's, and now he is a college professor. So he's doing well.
Wow.
Yeah, he's doing great. And myself, my path was a little bit different. I started going back to school, but I was also a single mom of 3 kids at the time. So I started, and it was like life was just getting a little too crazy, and I was like, God, I can't do this. And so I finally decided to lean into my life and say, okay, school must not be the right thing for me right now because I have too much going on. But I know God's going to take care of me. So I never had any fear that my bills wouldn't be paid or anything like that, even though I had a position. So I got a job, and then it was a low paying job, and then I got one that's a little bit better, and I went through a string of those until I, at least professionally, I got on my feet and was able to provide for myself and my children. So that took several years, but I started from ground zero. And then I ended up getting remarried it's not last year now, it was 2016. So I got married 7 years after we got divorced, and to a wonderful man. And last year, at the beginning of 2017, I actually had an experience with God, and I was called to help some of the people that I used to know that are now finding out a lot of the things that I found out 10 years ago. And so I had for a couple years just been talking to them on the side, like, oh, just counseling them, giving them advice, or maybe they went through like domestic abuse or something like that, and they were getting a divorce, and their church was turning on them because they decided to leave their husband, and they're like, what do I do? And now I have to get a job, and I have, 5 kids at home. And so I was just being a friend and being community for these people in my life that I knew that were going through a rough time. And so then that led to God's calling for me at the beginning of last year to actually, in a more constructive way, help these people. So what I do now, I still have my full-time day job, but also on the side, I help people. So I'll be a friend to anybody. I have a couple Facebook groups as well. And so one specifically for Christians in transition to whatever transition's happening in their life. And, but then for people that want to dive a little bit deeper and want to have more individualized coachings and either want to help with their deconstruction and just, what steps to take and that sort of thing, I do personal coaching. I have a handful of clients that I work with on the side for that. And so I do have some of those people that are, went through that spiritual trauma, if you will. But then I also have people that they're like, okay, I want help, but I want to incorporate my faith into it, my Christianity, my spirituality. Because a lot of coaches, it's very action oriented, but it's like, okay, I also want to make sure that, I'm aligned with God and my intentions are true. And how do I work that into my everyday life and also my business life? So I work with those people as well. So it is so fun and so fulfilling, and I just want to help people. So if there's any way I can, I am happy to.
Well, that's an amazing story of how you and your ex-husband basically your life around and went from having no or little skills to being a college professor and being a professional coach, helping other people dealing with issues, whether that's abuse from cult experiences or otherwise, and transitioning into whatever their ultimate purpose is as it relates to God. So I think that sounds awesome. There's another question from the chat section, Carmel. She asked if you have you ever heard of the Black Hebrew Israelites?
So I had not heard of them until I actually talked to Ange. And so I did some light research on it, and I was amazed at what I heard. So I really don't know a lot than just what the little bit I researched, but yeah, I feel for those that are in that situation, and my heart goes out to you. And if there's any of you that are in that, I don't know what, the group dynamics are here, but I'm happy to be a friend to anybody. So feel free, please friend me on Facebook. I am, here, and you can follow my Facebook page. I post articles and different stuff. It's more along the lines of healing stuff, so it's more positive, upbeat stuff. But I do have the background, and I do understand a little bit, even if it's in a different way. So I'm happy to be a friend and be community to anybody here that needs it.
Great, thank you so much. And I will put Cassie's information down in the information section once this finished streaming, and so that for future viewers that they will also be able to get a hold of her, both page to connect if they're looking for additional services or wanting someone to talk to or wanting to see different information, because one of the other traits of a destructive cult organization is information control. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening in those situations is that the only information that the cult member has is the information that's coming from their individual cult. And so the world shifts because their world shrinks and their world just becomes whatever they're involved in with the cult. Impacts people a great deal. And I don't know if we really discussed this part, but control impact you at all, Cassie, while you were in the cult organization? Were you only like listening to the people in your church? Were you only reading the information that they said? Were you only looking at what they told you to look at?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So no magazines were allowed. If you did watch the news, which was one of the only few acceptable sort of things to watch on TV, it had to be the conservative news channels. Again, you couldn't go to a public college. You couldn't even send your kids to public school. So I have always been a big reader, so I would go to the Christian bookstore, and probably 90% of the books in the Christian bookstore, they did not approve of. So a lot of the books that I read, even from the Christian bookstore, I kind of hid from people so that they wouldn't see me reading it.
Wow, why didn't they approve of those books?
So if a book was written by somebody that was more liberal, so going back to the Christians that are not like us, so Joyce Meyer or Billy Graham, they thought those were all liberal, unholy people. So if I read,
So based on the belief system, were most people going to inherit the kingdom, or were most people going to blaze in hell?
oh, most people would blaze in hell for sure.
To blaze in hell, like the smallest transgression led you to hell?
So they believe so that you come out of your mother's womb a sinner, if you will. So they say like the first time you cry as a baby, that's a sin. So so the only way to heaven is through accepting Jesus as your personal savior. So you have to not just know about God, you have to consciously know about Jesus, and you have to know that he died on the cross, and you have to accept the gift that he has extended to you, which is eternal life. So there's no variations from that. So if you are a tribe in Africa that's never heard the name Jesus before, you will burn in hell forever.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And even so, if you think about, just Christianity in general, like even Americanized Christianity. So how many people do we think went through those exact, steps to accept Jesus as their savior? A lot of people just say, oh yeah, I believe in God, so I'm going to heaven. So, but they would say, well, it's not just about believing, it's about believing and accepting his gift of eternal life. So you need to have all parts of it. You can't just believe in God.
But then you also had to go the extra step, was be a part of them.
You didn't have to be a part of them, but if you were a born-again Christian and you went to a church that was not their church, they would think of you as super worldly and not right with God if you were not in the kind of church that they thought was the right kind of church.
Wow. So were there people in the church who were not judgmental? I know you spoke about them saying the worldly people, you're smoking cigarettes, or like, were the people in the church perfect? Were they like perfect people?
No, so they would say, oh, well, I'm not perfect, and oh, none of us are perfect, and then turn around and make fun of somebody else for whatever their considered sin or transgression was. So it was definitely weird. It was very much here's the 2,000 reasons why they're sinners, but oh, I'm a sinner too. But of course they didn't go into details about their sins.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that question. As a person, as a human being, do you think you were a better human being when you were in the cult, or are you a better human being now? Like, were you looking out for humanity during those times?
Oh, no. So I think I am so much more compassionate and loving and caring than I ever was before. So whether this is intentional or not, but a lot of the cult is the them's against me. So if it's you against the rest of the world, then you start seeing the world as separate from you. And then when you start seeing people as separate from you, then it's very easy to fall into the trap to start dehumanizing people. And when you dehumanize people and make it like, these are just bad people, so it's okay to make fun of their sins, or these are not saved people, so it's okay to make fun of them because they're immigrants, then you kind of get into that whole group think, and it makes it easier to put down people and not relate to them on a human level. So that's some of the unpacking that I had to do. And so when I started unpacking and I like started looking at the social issues that I once thought this way about it, like, oh, if you're on food stamps, why don't you just go get a job? Like, that was literally what I thought. And now I'm like, my sister was on food stamps for one part-time, and if she didn't have food stamps, this was somebody that worked, like her kids wouldn't have food. So me as a human being, I'm like, okay, like I don't want anybody on food stamps, but if it's going to feed a child, like I'm all for it. So right. 100 times over, I just think I'm a more compassionate person. Or like immigrants, like I used to, I never would have said I was against immigrants, but I definitely would have fallen more into that line than not. And now I'm like, if you put your life on the line and you are living in a dangerous country and you just want to escape and have a better life for your family, like my heart goes out to you. And if there's anything I can do, like I will. So, but that was never the thought before. It was never connecting to them like on a human level and saying, I see your pain and I can understand that. It's more, well, they're in here illegally. It's like, okay, yeah, they're in here illegally, but they're also people. These are like living, breathing people with feelings and children and parents and families getting ripped apart. So I definitely think that, there's a lot of complexity to any social issue, but I just think that now I empathize more with people that are on the hurting side. It's not black.
That's a good thing. I see we just had a new joiner.
Yeah, I wanted to ask this
Dragon.
woman if she knows that Jesus is a bad guy. Does she know that Jesus is a baby killer? Does she wake up to that yet?
So I'm not sure I don't know if that's a serious question, so I'm not sure how to answer it.
Oh, it's the most serious question anyone will ever ask you. Do you defend baby killing?
I don't defend baby killing, for sure.
Do you defend Jesus Christ? Because if you do, he's a baby killer.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and eject Dragon because that doesn't make any sense. We'll carry on. Yeah, we'll carry on.
No worries.
So did anyone else inside of here have any other questions or comments that they wanted to ask Cassie? And let me see if there are any comments out here in the. And is there any other any other thoughts that you might want to share with someone who might find themselves in a situation where there's a significant possibility that they may be involved in a destructive cult organization or an unhealthy relationship with any organization for that matter? Because I guess you could, in theory, fall shy of being a cult but still be harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I were to look back and I were to give myself advice to the 15, 20-year-old Cassie, I would say don't ignore those nudges that something's not right, because I feel like we all had some of those and we learned to ignore them. So if something doesn't seem right, don't just push it down. Try and, look into it and figure it out what it is. that doesn't sit right with you. It may not make sense right now, but maybe one day it will. And to just keep searching, keep looking for God. Like we said about that verse in Jeremiah, like if you truly want to know God, and I feel like even through my entire experience, I did want to know God, even when I was, preaching some hateful things, I wanted to know God. And so I was open to whatever his leading was, whatever it might have been. And he actually ended up leading me away from this church. So I would say stay open to God. Don't ignore the nudgings if something doesn't seem right. And then I would say that if there are people in your life that love you and care for you, like your wife, your children, your brother, your sister, if they come to you and they say something to you and they're concerned, to not ignore it, because when somebody truly loves you and they want what's best for you, and they have that kind of feedback for you, you should probably listen to it. So that's one thing that I've learned as well, is to be able to take feedback, because I did get feedback, but ironically, it wasn't until after I was, out of the cult, and I still had some of the bad, just tendencies that I had to react to situations a certain way. And somebody said, hey, like, why are you like this? Like, what is going on? So I'm thankful for those people that did say something, although I wish now, as you had asked earlier, that somebody would have come to me and just asked me more questions, because it might have given me pause. So don't ignore those people. Don't ignore those nudgings, and keep searching for God, because if you truly want to find God, as Jeremiah says, he'll lead you.
Great. And I have one last question, which I should have asked before this, but I forgot about it. You have children.
Yes.
I believe you said that you had these children while you were still in the cult. Can you describe how you were raising your children while you were in the cult, and if that differs in any way since you have been out?
Yeah, so when we left the cult, my oldest was 3 or 4 years old, so they were still pretty young. And actually, one of the red flags for me happened because of how I was disciplining my oldest son. So what happened was, he was 2 or 3 years old, and like many others in this church, like, it was kind of corporal punishment. So I would spank him for anything he did wrong. So it wasn't obsessive. It wasn't child abuse. There was no there were no bruises, nothing like that. But I would spank him. And I remember one time I walked into the living room. He wasn't in trouble, nothing. I just walked into the living room where he happened to be playing. He looked up and he saw me and he flinched. And I was like, oh,
wow.
It makes me tear up right now. I was like, oh my God, what just happened? And so in that moment, I was like, okay, something is wrong here and I need to change something. So that was one of the things, the huge red flags. And that was the one that I probably acted on the quickest. So,
wow.
Yeah. Oh God, it just tears my heart right now. So thankfully, we left the church when they were still really young. So they don't remember any of that time in their life. And yeah, so I know that's not the case for a lot of people. I know they have children that are school age or high school, and that's got to be really hard. And I can't relate, unfortunately, but I just know that just keep loving on them. That's the best gift you can give them. Keep loving on them, no matter if you have a spouse or somebody else in a relationship that's, going through a difficult time, possibly in a cult. So they need a stable parent. And if you are going to be determine that you're going to be the stable parent. I think I read some studies. This was a long time ago, so I don't even remember what the exact numbers were, but they were saying that in households where one parent is like off the deep end, something turbulence going on, whether it wasn't necessarily about cults, but like maybe drug abuse or whatever, but I feel like it could fall into the same category. As long as one parent was sane, rational, took good care of the children, that the kids came out just as well as any other kids. So
Great.
yeah, so I would just say, hang in there and hold on. And my heart goes out to you.
And last question, when you were going through the time of when you were in the cult, when people treated you kind and were loving to you, even though you weren't necessarily being that way to them, whether you were actually expressing it to them or even just thinking the negative thoughts, how did that love or that kindness from others who you probably in many cases thought they were hellbound, how did that impact you, either at that time or later thinking back?
Yeah, so that was definitely a red flag too. So my great grandmother, who was one of the kindest persons I'll ever know, she helped our family so much over the years. She was Catholic, and she's the one I went to Catholic church with until I was like 5 or something like that. We lived with her for a short amount of time when my mom was getting on her feet. And according to the church that I went to, my grandma was going to burn in hell forever. So because she hadn't taken the actual steps of, she believed in God, but if she didn't actually accept Jesus into her heart in this exact way, that she wasn't going to heaven. And so I was like, how could somebody so kind and so compassionate that believes in God, how could they be going to hell forever? But those were things where we weren't allowed to voice. So we didn't voice those. We just shoved it down, ignored it. And when we did voice those kind of concerns, it was, I mentioned it previously, but the most common answer you would get is God's ways are not our ways. God's ways are not our ways. So yeah, it was.
And what do you do with that as a kid? Like, what do you do with the kind of responses that you were getting, where basically no answers to any questions you were asking?
So I think that's why so any cult is dangerous, but you have a cult that's going out and picking up children and bringing the children to church and teaching them these things. So I didn't really know any better. These were adults in my life that were telling me that you don't ask questions. So I thought, okay, you don't ask questions. So I didn't really have the analytical capabilities at such a young age to discern whether that was actually right or not. It was, this authority figure is telling me this. They're telling me this is in the Bible, and so I believe it. So even now, so many years later, I see church buses and I'm like, they're all bad, because they're not all bad, but you don't know what people are teaching your kids until you go yourself. So,
Correct.
Yeah. So
that is true.
Yeah.
That is true. It's not a good idea to just have your kid going, especially not at 8. Be with them to make sure that nothing is coming in or no one is doing anything that would be harmful to your child without you being there to protect your child. So I definitely appreciate that. And how do you think your thought processing has changed from the time of you being a kid to a youth and young adult to now?
Oh yeah, it has changed a lot. So a lot of my thinking was based on what I had learned as, a young child growing up in this church. And I was in the church from I was 8 to about 25 or so. And well, not 25, it was a little bit younger than that, but it was at least 15 years. So it was a lot. After we got out of it was the deconstructing that, I had mentioned before. It was, I would think a certain way about something and I would say, okay, do I really think this, or is this because of what I was taught? So I had to relearn so much. So Now my heart's much softer, much more open. I mentioned a little bit more empathetic to people that are going through a hard time. As far as like the Bible, for a long time, I was kind of turned against it. Like, not like, oh, I'm against the Bible. No, I wasn't against the Bible. It just, I had such a bad experience that I was kind of too wounded to go back to it for a while. But over the last few years, I have been able to go back to the Bible and kind of separate out the bad stuff and, not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Just because I was raised in this sort of Christianity that was, a little bit more dangerous than a lot of the other more, innocent, if you will, types of Christianity, there's still so much good in the Bible and so much we can learn about God and Jesus and how we can incorporate his teaching into our lives. And so it took me a long time to get there, but I did. So I'm more open to, okay, God, I used to say that I didn't want the Bible in my life, but now I'm open to it. So, and I'm open to any teaching. I've kind of learned that, I'm not going to put God in a box anymore. I can have a spiritual experience by reading my Bible, or I can, be in the grocery store line and get an epiphany about, something that was bugging me 3 weeks ago. So I'm just thankful that God is out there and hasn't given up on me after all of these years. And I'm very excited about whatever's to come in the future. Or at least I still believe in God, and I know he has a plan for me, and I'm just hoping that continues to be helping as many people as it can.
Oh, that is awesome. Can you let the viewers know again, well, not again, because I don't think you said it the first time, what your Facebook page is? So if they want to reach you, I'm going to put it in the info section, but can you just let the people know where they can connect with you on Facebook?
Put it in the chat. Would that work?
Yes, it will.
Okay. There you go. Can you see that okay?
I can see that okay. I share this in the main chat with the regular view. Oh, it won't even let me grab it, will it?
It's just Facebook / my
name. I was
was
just trying to copy it. It won't let me copy it. I will I will put it up. But yes, it's just her name, Cassie Carlotto, Facebook.com/Cassie Carlotto. So I will have that in the info section so that all of the viewers at a later time will still be able to find it. Oh, right. Here it is. I can grab it. And they will be able to connect with you. So I am very grateful that you shared your testimony here with me today. Your time, your courage, and the strength, and everything that you're doing, not only to help yourself and your family. You've come in contact with, which you're saying is now your side job, but I have a feeling that one day that will not be your side job, that it will be your main job, and that is along the lines of what God's purpose will be for you. So I'm going to go ahead and speak that into existence now. And just pray that you can continue to do that. And you have a very positive ending story to what could have been something totally different, and other people's experiences being in a cult far more destructive than what you have described, and so their lives are turned way more upside down, and some of the people never recover. So I'm happy to hear this story of how you and your ex-husband were able to thrive after getting out of the cult, and just turn that time into a footnote in the rest of the story that you'll have that will be far more beautiful than the beginning. So I definitely thank you for taking the time to share your testimony here. I'm sure it will help a number of people along the way as they journey through YouTube and whatever experiences they're having with a potentially destructive cult organization. Sister Rika / Brother TVCO, do you have any comments that you want to share right before we end this?
Oh, he had to leave.
Oh, I know he left. I just didn't know if he was still listening on yours. But did you want to say any final words to Cassie or to the audience?
Just read your Bible and get a close relationship with Jesus Christ and let him know how you feel.
Amen.
Thank you
Amen.
so much. You guys are wonderful.
Well, that's it for tonight. I think we did it just at an hour and a half, so not too long and not too short. So again, I will drop the Cassie's contact information in the info section for those who are listening now who want to connect, and those who listen in the future who want to connect. Thank you again, Cassie, for coming and speaking. Sister Rika, thank you for joining in on this. Brother TVCO, thank you for joining in when you were in as well. And until next time, thank you, everybody, and good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.